Hi, I'm Stephen Buoro, and this is the 5 Sorrowful Mysteries of Andy Africa.
This is your debut novel, which is, I have to say, I'm struck by how beautiful the writing is and the story. Tell us what the story is about and introduce Andy, and I'm going to read him in your words. A 15-year-old African genius poet altar boy who loves blondes. Yeah. Tell me about Andy.
Yeah. So Andy is a 15-year-old boy. He lives in northern Nigeria with his mother. That is where I actually grew up. I grew up in a town called Kotangura, and that is where my novel is set. So Andy has a complicated relationship with his mother. She's poor, she's uneducated. But Andy has a unique secret, and his secret is his obsession with blondes and with whiteness, the West, and American culture and all that. And so in a nutshell, the novel is how Andy juggles and the feelings of shame he feels towards his mother due to how poor and uneducated she is, and how his experiences becomes intensified, how when his life is suddenly destabilized by communal violence, by religious riots in northern Nigeria.
So Andy, of course, being obsessed with blondes, manages to find the one blonde in his town. She comes to town. Tell us a little bit about Eileen.
Yeah, so Eileen is a blonde British girl, and she's the niece of a missionary priest, of Andy's parish priest. So she comes to Nigeria, for the summer, and then Andy meets her at a party that the church, because the church throws for her anyway, and they meet, and that is where their relationship begins from,
And he's completely obsessed with her.
Yeah, and it's completely.
But she's obsessed with him as well.
Yeah, and it's so both of them they are in this stage of their lives where they are still processing so many things. Being a teenager, being a human being in the very first place.
Right.
And in terms of Andy processing like the complications of his community of Nigeria, like the legacies of perhaps of slavery, colonialism in Nigeria. So all these things cause a crisis of self within him and a craving for otherness, And then Eileen is like the fire, whatever, or the match flame or so that inflames everything in the novel.
What is HXVX?
Yeah.
The Curse of Africa.
Yeah, so my narrator, Andy, he's a very creative young person, even though he's navigating many things like issues of colonialism in Nigeria and then sex and just coming of age in general. So Andy, in the novel, Andy attempts to create like a mathematical formula with which he can use to describe, understand, and perhaps solve the problems plaguing his country and his continent, even in general. So Andy comes up with the idea of HXVX. So and some of the problems that Andy attempts to describe and solve include the legacies of slavery and colonialism, the dictatorship in Nigeria, the collapse of our governments, the kleptocracy, plutocracy, since independence, So and these problems are incredibly huge, and they sometimes seem to come from an evil super force, perhaps like a supervillain, in fact, or an evil god or something. And so Andy borrows the idea of the name of God in Hebrew in the Old Testament, YHWH. So he borrows that idea and to give a name and a face to all these problems, which are so huge and so impossible to conceive and to put in our minds together at the same time. And that is the idea of HXVX. So Andy realizes that the problems plaguing his country and all the continents are planetary in size, are astronomical, and perhaps might require such solutions, astronomical solutions, which is in a way a quite pessimistic way of looking at contemporary Nigeria. But but in a way the formula gives Andy like hope, or gives him like something to hold, to grasp on.
Well, it's a wonderful way for him to internalize and then become a writer, because he has to. He's writing poetry, and his aunt actually takes one of his poems and puts it into a contest, and he wins it. And he's just like, how could this happen to me? This is incredible. I mean, the 15-year-old reaction to that is just priceless.
So like I wrote a lot of poetry when I was around Andy's age, and I found poetry hugely therapeutic for me, and I found poetry as a way of like airing my emotions, my angst, my anger, of the anger of being a teenager anyway, and come to terms with the turmoil around me. So I hopefully like readers or many young readers who get to read the book, might take up those kind of these disciplines like poetry and I mean we are all poets. We all respond to language and we all love language so yeah.
Love your background story and how you were teaching, and now you've got the Booker Prize award
And scholarship.
Yeah. And you were able to then switch from teaching maths to actually being a writer. You always wanted to be a writer, though, right?
Yeah, since when I was like 10 years old, yeah. I mean, first I didn't grow up in a house with books, because my parents, we're working class, and we only had like the Bible and a couple of religious texts in my house. When I transferred to missionary school, that I first had access to a library. Anyway, so I read a book. I can't remember the name of the book now, and it's just made me to just come alive. I could just see the world. I could just immerse. I've just felt immersed in the world, in the fictional world that I was reading about. The characters, the emotions, the smells, the feelings there, and it just sparked so many things within me, and I felt, perhaps I should actually pursue this. I should become a writer. It was a few months after my father died, and I was sitting outside my house and had a pencil with me and a notebook. So I remember I suddenly found myself writing a story, and I was writing a story about a war in the animal kingdom, how the fish were ostracized, were forced away from land and made to move into water and to adapt there. And suddenly I found that I had so much power. For example, I could create trees with eyes, with hair, trees that spoke. And like I had so much agency, and it felt as though I was doing something spiritual, something illegal at the same time, anyway. So anyway, I wrote a story and I showed it to a schoolmate of mine, and he read it and he didn't believe that I was one who wrote the story. He thought perhaps I had copied it from somewhere or something, and that was like a huge motivation for me to write. It made me realize that perhaps I could actually do this. That if this guy couldn't believe that I wrote this, and in a way, every piece of writing that I've gone on to write has been a way of not just convincing myself, but like convincing the guy wherever he is in the world that I can actually do this.
This is a love story.
Yeah, it's a love story.
It's a love story.
Yeah,
we haven't even talked about his mom.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So like in a way, like the novel, I see the novel as a love story in three ways. A love story between like a mother and a son, because Andy has a very complicated relationship with his mother. He hugely loves her, but at the same time, he's hugely ashamed of her. She's poor, she's uneducated, she's black, she mispronounces English words and all that, and so there's so many things about her that he rejects. It's also a love story between Andy and Eileen, the blonde British girl that he falls in love with, and in a way too, I think it's a complicated love story about the relationship between Nigeria and perhaps the African continent as a whole, with the West and all, with the colonizers and all. So it's just complications all around and all. Yeah.
You did a wonderful job. Congratulations! It's a really great book.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
Stephen, it's been delightful talking to you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's delightful talking to you too. Yeah.
And thank you for watching A Word on Words. I'm JT Ellison. Keep reading.
Nigerians are some of the happiest people in the world, which is very funny because of the bad things that happen. Or we think we are the happiest people in the world. We truly not are. We're just wearing masks to shield all the turmoil within ourselves and all.